He was a very changed man. Uh, Frederick Douglass said, if John Logan can make changes like these, there's hope for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think that is what we need to remember still yet today. Change is possible.
From the river to the valley to the sea. All the places, all the people that you can meet.
Welcome to the Mississippi Valley Traveler Podcast. I'm Dean Klinkenberg, and I've been exploring the deep history and rich culture of the people and places along America's greatest river, the Mississippi, since 2007. Join me as I go deep into the characters and places along the river and occasionally wander into other stories from the Midwest and other rivers. Read the episode show notes and get more information on the Mississippi at MississippiValleyTraveler.com. Let's get going. Welcome to episode 46 of the Mississippi Valley Traveler Podcast. One of the great joys of my work is as I'm traveling around, I sometimes stumble across really big stories that I knew absolutely nothing about. This happened this past spring when I was driving around southern Illinois while I was researching an update for one of my guidebooks. And I stopped in Murphysboro to visit a museum I had heard about but had never actually had a chance to visit, the General John Logan Museum. And I have to admit, I was completely blown away by what I learned during this visit. I probably was at the museum for a good hour, taking time to read all the panels and soak in all the information I could about Logan and his life. It's a big story, and one that I wanted to bring to you. So in this podcast today, I have the honor of talking with Betsy Brown, who is the president of the board for the museum, and with Laura Varner, who is the curator and director of the museum. During this wide-ranging interview, we cover a lot of the background of Logan's life, how he entered politics at a really young age. He was ambitious from the start, and early in his career, he was a fairly typical Democrat of the era, in that he did not oppose slavery, did not want to see it expand either, but felt it was his responsibility to defend the law of the land, which at the time allowed slavery. So early in his career, he had a hand in writing some legislation that I believe he came to regret quite a bit later in his life. When the Civil War broke out, he entered the Union Army. There was a lot of concern at the time about what would happen with Southern Illinois, given that the allegiances of many of the families were more toward the southern states. So we talk about what happened at that point in time when Civil War broke out. We talk about his experiences as a leader during the Civil War. He was a political appointee, and that often did not work out for officers who were appointed primarily for political reasons. So we get into what happened with his service, and I'll give you a quick little spoiler. He turned out to be a very good leader. And then we cover what happened in his life after the war ended, and he went, the incredible transformation that happened to him during the Civil War itself, where he got to see the conditions that enslaved people lived under, completely transformed his views about the institution of slavery and African Americans in this country. And he became one of the band of what were called radical Republicans at the time. So we talk about that and what that meant and what kind of legislation he ended up supporting and pushing in his post-war career. I think it's a great story because, so many times we see courage as somebody sticking by their beliefs, regardless of things. I think another way to show courage is to change some of these deeply held views in the face of evidence that maybe those views don't really hold up. And he was a person who went through this remarkable transformation, as I mentioned. So we talk a lot about that as well. He also had a remarkable wife, and we touch base on some of her accomplishments and her role in all this as well. So I think it's a very interesting interview. It's a great topic. I don't think the story of Logan is nearly as well known as it should be. So hopefully this brings a story to you that you haven't really heard much about before. As always, thanks to those of you who show me some love through Patreon. Your support makes me feel good, and it keeps this podcast going. You can join the Patreon community for as little as $1 a month, and when you do so, one of the benefits is you get early access to all the podcasts. Don't like Patreon? Well, you can buy me a coffee. I drink plenty of coffee, and I appreciate every little bit that goes towards supporting that habit. So if you want to find out how to join Patreon or how to buy me a coffee, go to MississippiValleyTraveler.com/podcast. You'll find the instructions there. And at that same place, at MississippiValleyTraveler.com/podcast, you'll find the show notes and a list of all previous episodes, all available for you to listen to at your leisure. Or leisure, depending on how you like to pronounce the word. So, with that, let's get on with the interview. Here is Betsy Brown, the president of the board of the John A. Logan Museum, and Laura Varner, the curator and director of the museum. Let's kind of get right into a little bit about General Logan's life. Let's start at the very beginning. Tell us a little bit about his parents, what they did, and where John Logan was born.
Well, Logan was born very near the museum, although he would never lived in this building. About 150 feet outside the front door was the home of his father, Dr. John Logan, and he was born there in 1826 before Murphysboro existed. The county seat at that time was Brownsville, which the courthouse burned in 1843, and at that time, Dr. Logan donated land to become Murphysboro. So Dr. Logan had moved here from Missouri, had been a former slave owner, moved to Illinois. He was involved in politics. He was a doctor, a medical doctor, taught by another doctor, no formal schooling. So he was a man of means. He enjoyed horse races. He raised horses, sold horses, and was very involved with his oldest son. He encouraged his oldest son to become a doctor, of which John had no interest. But he did follow in his footsteps, both in politics, in the military. So he did look up to his dad in those ways. His mom was born in North Carolina, very much the ideal Southern woman. She began in the first Southern Methodist Church here in Murphysboro. She was really upset with her son whenever he decided to join the Union Army. Didn't speak to him for some time. But John came from a strong family, a Methodist family that believed in the importance of family, no matter what your social standing or color. And so that stayed with John throughout his life.
So do you know what attracted them to move to Southern Illinois in the first place?
I know he moved when he sold off his 30 slaves before moving to Illinois, but except for two, a mother and a son, because he believed that family should not be broken up, even though enslaved or otherwise.
So he had moved from Missouri then, right? Do you know whereabouts?
Yeah, Cape Girardeau area.
All right.
Yeah.
So he really just kind of jumped across the river, and maybe there was an opportunity to buy some land or, to do something a little different or.
Well,
Yes.
especially being inland so much more. This was really wide open space, and there was very little here, at the time. So
Right.
Cape Girardeau was a booming river town. So that's a very different area.
Right.
we-
Maybe it got too crowded for him and he wanted
Yeah,
some
Well,
yeah.
room to spread out.
And I know that he owned roughly 250 acres of land whenever he moved here. Yeah.
Yeah,
Might
it
have
was probably inexpensive and
And that would have been about 1824. Logan was born in 26. So the doctor moved here, built home.
So John was born when after they moved to Illinois. And you said that his father wanted him to be a doctor. What do you think John's expectations for himself were? Do you have any idea like what kind of career he aspired to himself?
Oh, he wanted to be a politician from the time he was a young boy. He wanted to be a politician, and he had the gift of gab.
yeah, it was
Yeah, he in school, he became an even better orator. Uh, I think he was just a very convincing personality, no matter what the topic.
So it seems like maybe he was elected to the Illinois legislature as a member of the House first, or
Yes, yes,
yeah.
representatives.
And so when he ran for political office in Illinois, then so what were the options politically? What political party did he join, and what attracted him, or why did he gravitate toward one particular party?
Well, he was first a Democrat, um, and honestly, he helped create and set in place the black codes that um, prevented African Americans from settling in Illinois. Um, was very much behind that movement. Um,
Yeah, and I think that's part of the story that's really interesting
it
about him.
is.
Yeah.
It
That's
is.
where
Yeah.
so
you can't
he
stop with that comment. You need to move on because to hear the
Right.
rest of the story, as they say.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, and he was as I understand it, he kind of would have been a fairly typical Democrat at that time.
Oh,
That
definitely.
Yeah, Democrats totally switched from what it is
Hmm.
right.
perceived as today.
So and he earned a particular nickname. Can you tell me a little about the story, like what the nickname is and how that became attached to him?
Blackjack Logan. Yeah. Well, he was a man with very prominent dark hair. Uh, a lot of people thought that it was Native American, but I think it was more a Celtic background because his dad was from Ireland. Um, so yeah, he became very well known as Blackjack. Was
Yeah.
it Battle of Atlanta? All of his men were following him, chanting "Blackjack, Blackjack."
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Now,
So he
didn't he,
became very well known as that.
I guess I was thinking of another one that a Chicago paper I think might have attached to him because of a speech he made when he was in the Illinois legislature. Um, that he said Democrats or something along the lines of Democrats were willing to do the dirty work
Dirty
of
work,
Yeah.
Logan.
Yeah,
Yeah.
dirty
enforcing the Fugitive Slave
Yeah.
Act, and
Yeah, that's the other nickname.
Yeah.
yeah,
Matter of fact, whenever he became the colonel of the 31st, they called them the Dirty First.
oh well. Do you how do you think he felt about that nickname? Is there anything? Do you have any documents or anything about what his reaction was to that nickname? Or
Well, he didn't like he because he wrote to Mary his decision to join the Union Army and go fight was he wanted his daughter to be able to grow up and be proud
Mhm.
of the Logan name and proud of her father because he needed to put the past behind him because he realized at that time, and being called dirty work and what kind of dirty work was he known for? And it was all of, support of the black codes
Mhm.
and that sort of thing.
And that was his point then. That was the law.
Yeah.
It was in his job to enforce the law, and that was the law. And so he enforced it. He didn't his thoughts on that obviously changed, but at that time, and that was he's a very good representative of this area.
Yeah, his constituency. Yeah, after
Right.
that.
He certainly he represented the views of probably the majority of voters in his district at that time, essentially,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
Um, so that's, I think, part of what makes the next phase of his life interesting too. Is so Southern Illinois, I guess, describe kind of what the attitude would have been at the time toward slavery, toward national politics, and and the brewing um, secession that was coming. It's kind of set the stage for what was going on in Southern Illinois just before the Civil War.
Okay. Yeah. Um, well, Southern Illinois was just that, Southern. Many of the families that lived in this area had migrated from southern states. I'm sure that some of them still had family there. So the idea of going to war with the South was appalling to some people. Logan tried to find compromise because he didn't want to go to war either. Um, the rest of the state, the nation, I think, looked at this area as going south. And they even sent troops down here to make sure that didn't happen. But what ended up happening was exactly the opposite of that. These men were grandsons of Revolutionary War soldiers. And the idea of secession, they just couldn't tolerate that. Now, as far as slavery, most of the people looked at it as that's just the way it is. There's free people and there are people that are slaves, and they didn't feel the need to go to war over that. But when it came to secession, came to destroying the Union, they were completely Union sided. They joined the Union Army to stop secession, not necessarily to stop slavery.
Hmm.
Now that changed, but that's how it began.
Absolutely. So yeah, and I think that's a really important nuance in all this to understand too, is that there were a number of people before the Civil War, maybe even the majority of people who wanted to see the country stay together. It wasn't so much that they had a kind of moral issue with slavery or they wanted to end slavery, but they believed the country should stay together as one. And that was the priority.
You think about Logan's exposure to slavery was very minimal until he went to war. And that's, I think about all these people who lived far up in the north and they had no idea what slavery was, really what it meant. And he didn't either. His only connection was the son of the woman that his father kept when he moved to Illinois, actually became an indentured servant. Mm-hmm. And they were friends. He was 3 years older than John, and they palled around. So to him, it wasn't so bad,
right.
But when he went south and saw what it really was, then that affected him greatly. And think about it. When President Lincoln met Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, he said to her, "So you're the little lady that started this great war." And because she wrote a book about it and that people read who had no idea that's about slavery.
Mm-hmm. Right. And Lincoln himself had some firsthand knowledge too. He took at least two raft flatboat trips down the Mississippi from Illinois when he was in his 20s or early 20s, probably even delivering products down to New Orleans. And during those trips, he was exposed to slavery directly. I don't think he wrote anything much about that experience at all and how it shaped him, but it's hard to imagine that it didn't affect him in some way, just like it did with Logan, that when you see it in person. So did he write much about what he saw or what his reaction was to seeing slavery once he got into the South?
One thing I know specifically is he met a young woman who was with the 31st as contraband, making her way north. And her former owner somehow got a letter to her, a message to her saying that he was dying and he just wanted to see her one last time. And unfortunately, she went. And when she did, he sold her further south into slavery again. And so I know that Logan was affected by that. Um, so that's one incident that was documented by him.
Hmm. So you kind of hinted at this a little bit already too. So his decision to join the Union Army, even though the majority of folks in Southern Illinois followed suit, it did not really go over so well in his family, right?
It did not.
Oh.
So tell us a little bit about how his family reacted and the problems it created there.
Sister.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
we already said that his mother said she wasn't going to speak to him again, but whenever he and the 31st were getting ready to go to Cairo, I believe, she yelled out, his sister Annie yelled out a window, "Damn you, I hope you get killed before you make it to Cairo."
And then his wife was right there, Mary was right there. And so she took, and they had a, scratching, hair pulling fight. And it ended when Mary took a chair and broke it over Annie's head. So there you go.
Oh,
Yeah. Mary was not shy. She, no, she was a woman. If she acted upon,
Yep.
she took action.
Yes.
Yeah.
right.
Very powerful 4'10" lady.
Yeah.
4'10". Wow. Small but powerful, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
She's got a T-shirt on that says, "Though she be but little, she is fierce."
All right. Do you sell those at the museum, by the way? Like, I'm gonna have to get one next time.
Yes.
All right. All right. And I do want to come back to Mary a little bit later too. I want to hear a little bit about her because it sounds like she had an interesting life in her own, and she had her own set of accomplishments, which would have been a little unusual for a woman of that era. So we'll come back to her. All right. So his family was not very thrilled about this, but that was his mother and his sister. Do we know anything about what his father thought about him
His
joining the
father
Union?
had passed away.
Oh,
Yeah, so his father was already gone by this point.
Yeah, his brother-in-law.
1853.
Yeah, his brother-in-law wasn't entered the Confederate Army.
Hybert Cunningham. That's Mary's brother. And he joined the Confederate Army, truly believing his brother-in-law was going to join as well.
Yeah.
Right.
And so he ended up coming back home. He left the Confederate Army. I think it was after he realized that his brother-in-law was not going with him.
So he wasn't there very long after all, I guess, huh?
No, I don't think so. I don't know exactly how long, but he didn't stay with them. And then his own brother, John's own brother, Tom Logan, he got him a position as an officer in the Union Army until he got drunk one night and ran through camp on his horse yelling, "Hurrah for Jeff Davis." So his brother John then very strongly suggested to his brother that he retire from the military. So
Yeah, that's not exactly the example you want your officers to be setting, I imagine. So,
No, not at all.
so take us through his Civil War career a little bit too. I don't know that part as well, the story. I was doing a little bit of reading yesterday, and it looked like he had a very actually consequential military career as well.
He did.
When he entered the Union Army, where did he start? What was his position when he entered the Army?
He entered as a colonel.
As a colonel.
Yeah, he formed the 31st Regiment. He led them. Let's see, I think he ended up becoming, was it after Donaldson, I think is whenever he ended up becoming a major general.
All right. And so he signed up pretty much right away. Like we're talking like 1861-ish, or
It was a
around the
little
beginning
bit
of the war.
later because he was in politics at the time, at the beginning of the war, and he had asked Lincoln if he could leave his position and form a regiment earlier than he actually did, because Lincoln asked him to stay in politics for a little bit longer. And it was during that time that he joined a battle in civilian clothing.
Yeah. First battle of Bull Run.
Oh, he was at Bull
So
Run.
at the time, they would
Yeah.
politicians would go with picnic baskets and sit on hilltops and watch battles. And Logan went to one of these, and he had even written his wife back at home saying, "Don't worry, I'm going to stay a safe distance away." And before it was all said and done, he had picked up a gun and he was helping fight, and he was bringing wounded men off the battlefield, and yeah, so
Hmm.
that would have been his first involvement in the Civil War.
Right. I wonder if he wrote a letter after that telling his wife, "Oops, sorry, I did get a little involved after all."
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it was after. Yeah, he was criticized for not taking a stance prior. You know, he had to. Yeah, you're going to be for the Union, you're going to be for the South, and that was pivotal.
It was.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So so the command that he had were the battalions or the folks that he commanded, were they mostly from his area, mostly from Southern Illinois, or was he,
At the
what was that
beginning,
like?
yes, yes,
And
yes.
he helped organize those early.
Mhm.
Yeah. So take us a little bit through some of because he ended up surviving and fighting for the Union through the entire Civil War, right? He served pretty much the whole war.
Yes.
And there's just a little bit that I read. It looked like he was present at some very consequential events too. So can you take us kind of quickly through some of the milestone battles or events during his Civil War service?
Well, I mentioned Fort Donelson. That was February 62, and he was very badly wounded at that time. As a matter of fact, it ended up being in the newspapers that he had been killed. Um,
Yeah, that's how Mary found out about it. She's reading the newspaper and read her husband had been killed.
Oh my.
yeah, yeah. And I think she was 26 at the time.
Yeah, she's really young, but as evidenced by hitting Annie over the head with a chair, you know, she then decided she was going to go collect his body.
Yeah.
And bring him home. And she went to Cairo and said she wants to get on a ship. And they said, no, no, ma'am, you can't go because we're in the middle of a war. And she's, well, think twice. And so she tried, and she ended up um, uh, bribing someone who was, I don't know who it was, bribing, and this guy who said, get on the ship and hide. And he smuggled her onto the ship. And then when she got there, she found out that indeed he was still alive.
Very badly wounded. So she nursed him there, and I'm sure several other men, uh, until he was well enough to travel, and brought him back home. They were living at Carbondale at the time.
Right.
And he was very, very anxious to get back to it. He knew about the Battle of Shiloh beginning, and he rushed back probably well before he should have, and still missed the Battle of Shiloh, but was right back at it at that point. That's April 62. He and his men were involved in so many battles, but some of the bigger ones were at Vicksburg. They were there to
That's what I was thinking of, right? So he was commanding some of the troops that were part of the blockade or of
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tunnel. They were most of his troops were miners.
Yeah.
And they were really good at digging. So they dug a tunnel under the hill, the mountain there,
Yeah.
and
put explosives in it.
Yeah, except they were a little bit over enthusiastic.
Yeah.
They were a little bit over enthusiastic, and they blew the whole thing.
So there's a story about an African American man that was being forced, of course, to assist the Confederate troops. And when they set off one of these explosions, it actually blew him into the Union lines.
Yeah.
That's a rough way to get to get to freedom.
It is.
You know, if you think about the way Logan was wounded at Donaldson, it was, let's see, I think the order was First, he was hit in the shoulder. Then he was hit in the side, and actually it jammed his pistol into his ribs. And so he's had 2 wounds and he's still fighting. And then he was shot in the thigh, and that was it. He had felt, he couldn't continue anymore. So he was
lost.
Yeah, he was pretty, hell-bent on getting the job done.
He was. And, he caught a lot of criticism from a lot of the other officers because a lot of them were West Point men. And he was not. He was a political general. And that's the way the other officers looked at him. Is, you just got here because you're a bigwig in politics and you don't know what you're doing. And he, above and beyond, proved that he did.
I think that's what's interesting with his story too, is like so many of those political officers, let's just say most of them were not especially competent as it turned out in the field, but that was certainly not the case with Logan.
No, not at all.
Is this something, did he just have a natural talent for this, do you think? Or did he learn quickly? Like, what do you think helped explain how he became so much of an impact?
I think he did have a natural talent for it. Just like with politics, he was a born leader.
Good horseman. He and Daniel Brush would have horse races on their. They had like a track here in Murphysboro around on their property, and they would,
even as a boy.
And you can imagine if you can, and everybody could shoot, because if you could shoot and ride a horse all at the same time, that was good.
Yeah.
Right. And you said his father had raised horses too, or?
Yes. Yeah. So he'd been on the back of a horse since he was a small boy.
Right. Interesting. So part of the evolution then is like eventually the Civil War really did become more about emancipation. And there was a moment during Logan's service where there was, I don't know if desertion is the right word, but after the Emancipation Proclamation, a number of the troops under his command decided to go home after that. Can you just tell me a little bit about that story and what happened? And
there were several desertions after that. And I've got to back up and say this is all part of Logan's change. At the beginning of the war, whenever he was, gathering up these men to form the 31st, he told them, he said, we're going to save the Union. If Lincoln frees the slaves, we'll come back home. We are not fighting an abolitionist war. However, that was at the beginning. So, beginning of 1863, and Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation, and yes, men started deserting, but Logan fought against that. Tried to make sure he kept all of his men there, because by that point, that transition had begun. And although they thought abolitionists were upstarts and troublemakers, they started to see slavery for what it really was. And so, despite what he had said in the beginning, he stayed, and many other men stayed too.
Yeah. There's a story of Lindorf Osborne, who was a family member and cousin, married into the family, and married his cousin. So cousin by marriage. And Lindorf Osborne had been accused of, Logan had heard that Osborne had made several disparaging remarks about African Americans, and he called him into his office, and Logan says, "Is this true?" And Lindorf Osborne said, "Yeah, it's true," and he repeated it, and then so Logan told him to get out, and he had to leave, to resign, and he did.
Wow. That is it's a remarkable evolution to get to that point, I think. So let's kind of continue that thread then and get on to, like, after the war was over, he went right back into politics, correct?
He did.
So I think, was it at that point then he ran for the federal House of Representatives? Was that his first office after the Civil War?
Yeah, he must have been already there. Because he was going to run for the Senate
afterwards.
Okay. Yeah. But he changed parties after the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't just change parties, like he became part of the faction that, were known as the Radical Republicans.
Yes.
So Can you tell me a little bit about what that meant for him? What was he advocating for after the Civil War?
Oh, he was definitely fighting for equal rights for African Americans, equal rights, education.
Mhm.
He was a very changed man.
Mhm.
Frederick Douglass said, if John Logan can make changes like these, there's hope for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think that is what we need to remember still yet today. Change is possible.
Hey, Dean Klinkenberg here, interrupting myself. Just wanted to remind you that if you'd like to know more about the Mississippi River, check out my books. I write the Mississippi Valley Traveler guidebooks for people who want to get to know the Mississippi better. I also write the Frank Dodge Mystery Series that is set in places along the Mississippi. My newest book, The Wild Mississippi, goes deep into the world of Old Man River. Learn about the varied and complex ecosystem supported by the Mississippi, the plant and animal life that depends on them, and where you can go to experience it all. Find any of these wherever books are sold. People can evolve, they can change their views, and people can support, how do I want to say this? We can come together over certain common things, even if we disagree over others. So, like in this case, there was, before the war, um, folks wanted to keep the country together, and they were willing to fight to preserve the country, even if they didn't necessarily want to end slavery. But they found a way to come together to preserve the Union.
Yeah.
And in this case, like Logan's story, he not only gave speeches where he explained how Democrats were going to do the dirty work of enforcing the Fugitive Slave Act, but he had a hand in legislation that banned blacks from moving into the state of Illinois at all. And he evolved to the point where he was a vocal advocate of ending slavery, of constitutional amendments, ending slavery, and then for equal rights and voting rights, I believe, as well.
Mhm.
So I don't know quite how to ask this, but we've kind of covered this some, but it seems like his experiences during the Civil War were really fundamental in changing it. That firsthand experience of seeing what the lives were like for people who were enslaved just really profoundly changed him.
Definitely did.
Yeah.
Definitely did.
How'd that go over back home? Was he talking to his mother again yet when he came back after the Civil War? Or his sister?
Yes. I don't know exactly when that mended itself, and I joke all the time that grandchildren probably had a hand in that, but I think she held on to some of her views, her Southern views, but again, they got along, even though they didn't agree upon everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that probably when he was so badly wounded, one takes another look at your thoughts when you are faced with, because if Mary knew that he had read that he was dead, then surely his mother did as well.
Right.
Right.
And that way, like, oh, let's think about what's really important.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. So what was the arc of his political career like then after the Civil War? He kind of ascended fairly high politically.
Yeah.
He did.
Yeah.
He ran for vice president in 1886, 1884, sorry. He had plans to run for the presidency in 88. However, he passed in 86. But he was a very well-known figure. And I believe had he been able to run for president, I believe he would have succeeded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He was a national character, nationally known.
Which is why it's unfortunate that so many people don't know who he is.
Yeah.
It is.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's like he ran for vice president, and it wasn't for the fact that he had such a lousy running mate, a really bad running mate, a running mate that was so bad that his own party lobbied against for his opponent.
So, who did he run with?
James Blaine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like who?
Yeah,
another name lost to history, right?
Yeah, but he was very corrupt.
Yeah,
all right.
So corrupt that his own party did support the other side.
Yeah.
Well, um, yeah, one of the things that jumped out at me again, reading more about his history, is the number of places or monuments that were built to him. I used to travel to DC a lot for work, and I spent a fair amount of time around Logan Circle. And it never dawned, until recently, I never made that connection. I had no idea who that was named for. And there are monuments to him in other places as well.
And lots of Logan Logan counties, Logan in all the states. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I know we still have more of his story to tell, but I was just doing the math on this. So he was fairly young yet when he died. If he died in 1880s, in his 60s, early 60s?
60.
His
60.
wife did not die until 1923. He died in 1886, and she didn't die until 1923.
Wow. Yeah.
She
Well,
remained that entire time.
yeah. So the other major accomplishment in his life, though, was after the Civil War, he was also very active with the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic. So tell us a little bit about that organization. What exactly were they?
Well, whenever people come into the museum, if they aren't familiar with it, I ask them if they're familiar with the American Legion, and most people are. And so I start there. It was a veterans organization, but this was specifically for those Civil War soldiers. So the American Legion, you could become the son of a legionnaire. It didn't work that way with the GAR. These men felt that no one could understand what they had been through, and they were right.
Union, only Union.
Yeah,
by the way,
only Union.
only Union.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So they formed, I think, in the beginning for that understanding, so that they could have someone to talk to and to help the widows and the orphans, to help those veterans get the pensions that they deserved. And it ended up being a very strong organization.
Very political. They had political power.
They did. They're nonpartisan, but
Well, they were Union, so that was part of it.
Right.
but they accomplished a lot. They did help those veterans get those pensions. They did get pensions for widows and orphans.
Interesting. I wonder about that now too. I do a lot of genealogy. My family history is one of my passions. And I do have a few ancestors that served in the Civil War and received pensions afterwards. I think there was one, my great grandmother's got a widow's pension. I wonder how much somebody from the GIR might have actually helped them get those pensions.
That helped
Yeah.
countless people.
So it wasn't just sort of like a place to get together and rehash, your war experiences. And sometimes the Legion clubs are just about hanging out and some fellowship and some drinking and all that. But the GAR had a mission beyond just that.
Yes.
And they created a holiday, kind of. They're kind of credited with creating the forerunner of a very well-known holiday we still celebrate, as I recall.
And Logan was very much behind that. General Order Number 11 was put together by Logan. And
it was during his first term as Commander-in-Chief of the GAR, which was in 1868.
And what did that order specify then?
That the United States that would come together as a nation on one particular day and decorate the graves of those fallen Civil War soldiers. At that time, it was specifically for the Civil War soldiers. So that's why it started out being called Decoration Day, because they're decorating those graves. Now, eventually it expanded out to what we know now, that men and women of all wars, but that was its beginnings, or to remember those fallen soldiers, because Logan was very much a leader. Whenever he was an officer that led his men. He did not send his men into battle. He led them. he was always trying to make sure that they had enough food, enough ammunition. He took care of his troops, took care of those men. And to see man after man after man fall and die and grow ill and die, um, Logan wanted to make sure that this country did not forget the sacrifice those men made. And so it was something that was very near and dear to him and his wife.
Right. Yeah. Because she had been on a trip down south and had seen Southern women decorating the graves of their fallen Confederates. And they were actually the first to do that. The Southerners were. Well, but it makes sense because most of the battles were in the South. You know, that's where they died, in the South. So the graves were there. And then she came back and talked to her husband about it, you know, so she had some input there.
Mm-hmm. So was that Decoration Day when they chose that? Was that the last or no, the first Monday? No, I'm completely screwing up here. It was the last
Mondays
Monday
came
of May.
later.
Yeah, no, yeah, right. No, it was a specific. It was the 31st
Yeah.
or 30th, the last day of May. Well, 31st. Yeah, be
Yeah,
31st.
all right.
It was 31st. And the reason they chose that, because initially in the South, well, they had theirs Memorial Day is in April because their flowers come sooner. And that's when it was not federally, determined. And so then it was decided, well, the flowers up north will be in better shape at the end of May, which is it's at the end of May. That
Right.
makes sense. It's very true. End of May, flowers are here.
Yeah.
Right.
April, not so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So do you know at what point that merged or became more of a national holiday, celebrating all veterans and all wars, or all the war dead?
I think that was
It came much later.
radical.
I think it would have been in the 70s. It took a long time for it to
It
be.
did, yeah.
It took a really
And I
long
think
time.
you're right. I think it was in the 70s.
Yeah.
It became a national holiday.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And we did the Monday thing and all that
Yeah.
sort of thing,
So, in your experience, like now today, like we've kind of hinted at this a little bit too, how well known do you think John Logan's story is now? Like,
So not well known.
We're
We're trying
trying,
here. That's
yeah,
what we do here.
Yeah.
how well known is it locally? Do people in Murphysboro still celebrate Logan, or?
Well, we are going to in 2026, when it is his 200th birthday, we are planning a community-wide celebration. And we're tying that into the expansion of our museum. We're adding 2,800 square feet addition, because with the acquisition of GAR here in our building now, we don't have space. And we need more space. We need space for our temporary exhibits, to have special events. All of our events now have to be held outside unless they're really tiny. And so we're having, an issue with that. And so we need to add on. And so we hope to be breaking ground by 2026 and doing that. And so kind of a big celebration.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very big.
Very big.
Community wide.
Yeah.
And to go back to your question, how well he's known locally, I'd say that he is becoming he has become more familiar to people here because of the museum.
Mhm.
We've been here for 35 years.
Wow.
And every year we have groups of fourth, fifth, and sixth graders come through. And that's not counting the field trips from other classes and other grades. And so Logan's name is much more familiar than it used to be.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I think that we're making headway with that.
Oh yeah, and groups, local groups, because we have a speakers bureau. We'll be glad to go out and, speak to any group who asks, who wants. Yeah, and there's a Williamson County Homemakers Club,
Yeah.
or whatever. Our local DAR often
Yes.
meets here, and so we have. Are making inroads, and yes, certainly, well, in the last 35 years, but before then, I would say it was,
Yeah. No one knew.
Yeah.
Right. So how did the museum get started? I didn't realize that you've been around for 35 years. And congratulations on that. But how did the museum get started?
A T-shirt?
The one you're wearing, or
No, no. Mike Jones, uh, the director for all of those years up until October of last year, uh, met a person wearing a T-shirt from Atlanta that had something to do with Logan. And he said, "You know what? I live in Murphysboro, Illinois, where Logan was born, and we don't have anything for him other than a statue." And so that spurred him on to start talking to people, and they formed a committee through the Jackson County Historical Society, and that committee started working towards creating uh, the museum. So this was probably about 1985. So 89, they opened the doors to what is now the museum, what had been a burnout apartment building. But that apartment building had its own history. This building has its own history that is connected to the Logans because it's on Dr. Logan's original property. And as I mentioned, it's about 150 feet from where his home had stood before it burned in 1868. This building actually was built by John's brother Tom it was a single story house, sort of like a spec house, and was sold to a man named Christopher Buller, who added on to the house, brought it up and out a bit, and raised his 15 children here.
wow,
So
15.
15,
A
yeah,
lot of kids.
a lot of kids. And so it stayed in that family for some time. And then I think it ended up sold a few times and being divided up into apartments and kind of run down. And there was a fire. And so this committee purchased the building, gutted it, and created the museum, opened the doors in May, I think, of 1989.
And I think wasn't there a Buller relative in here through the 1970s or something like that? I mean,
Yes.
yeah, there was a Buller lived here for so they had the house for almost 100 years.
Yeah.
And then before it became.
I remember meeting her, little bitty, tiny, elderly lady who told me about sliding down the stair rail as a little girl.
Wow. One of the things that really impressed me about the museum too is I visit a lot of small town museums, and I absolutely love small town museums. Most of them, many times they feel like you're kind of walking through somebody's attic, and sometimes the displays are kind of handwritten or they're sort of um, thrown together fairly quickly. Your displays are all of the highest, like professional quality. Everything is really well presented. You've done a great job, sort of, on the visual side of presenting the story of John Logan, and then having artifacts that really tell those stories well too. So I just wanted to mention that. I think that it's a great visit. Before we wrapped up, I did want to have a chance to talk a little bit about his wife, about Mary. She lived another, as you said, 30 some years after he passed away. So tell us a little bit.
37 years.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
She had a lifetime of her own, basically, after he
She was
passed
12
away.
years younger than he.
All right. So tell us about some of the things that she did, because you have a whole display just on some of her accomplishments. Tell us a little bit about Mary, besides the fact that she was a dynamo in a small package.
Well, she was the oldest child of, I forget now how many, several children. Her mother was in poor health, and so she helped raise her siblings, basically. And her father recognized in her, I think, a certain sort of intelligence that he didn't want to go to waste, and so he made sure she had a good education. She worked in his office whenever he was a clerk, I believe, in Williamson County, because that's where she was from, is Williamson County. And she married Logan when she was 16.
Wow.
That's really, yeah.
And from then on was his biggest fan, his biggest supporter. And whether it was politics, military life, no matter what, she was behind him 300%.
Mm-hmm.
She was an accomplished author. She wrote magazine articles, wrote books. Sure, one of her best friends was Clara Barton. So she was also in charge of the Red Cross. She
worked with the Red
She worked with the Red
yeah.
Cross as well.
Mm-hmm. So what did she write about? What were her books and articles about?
Well, she wrote about women in history.
Mhm.
She wrote about being John Logan's wife.
Her autobiography is about yay big.
Yeah. She's wordy. She was very wordy. Yeah. But so
Which
was
was
John.
typical for the time. But...
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
So she wrote the story of his life then, I guess, essentially. But
from her point of view, I suppose.
Yeah. She wrote about how he was going to recruit soldiers in Marion. And she was, and they were living in Benton at the time, right? And so she was afraid for him. And that, because Marion, it's still today, Marion was seen, there were soldiers who were recruited from Marion, from the Williamson County, who went to the Confederacy. And so he was recruiting for the Union, obviously. And she was worried about his physical safety. And he said, no, like always, no problem. You just stay home. Well, like waving a red flag.
Yeah.
And so she got in a carriage, and from Benton to Marion, back in those days, that's a hike, by car, that's what, 20 minutes?
Yeah. Maybe a little more depending on where
Yeah,
you're going.
20, 30 minutes by car, speeding along. And so she gets in a wagon, and she hides out just in case, so he would have some place she could whisk him away if something went south, so to speak, literally.
Right.
Yeah. So she was something. Yeah.
Where did she live after he passed away then?
Washington.
And he kind of, after the war, was that basically his home was in Washington because he was in Congress? And
yeah, they were in Chicago for a time, but from Chicago to Washington, and then that's where she remained after his death.
Mm-hmm.
And she not only wrote books, but she wrote many articles. She became nationally known herself. She was not directly involved in politics, but she had her opinions about it, and very very social person. She was involved with the Pullmans. She even took two daughters to Europe.
Oh, that's right. She did. Yep.
Oh, wow. Well, it's a great story. I think folks ought to visit the museum in person and see the exhibits for themselves. Are there any good books about Logan's life you would recommend? Like, is Mary's version of that still available in print somewhere? Or
yeah, I think you have to look online to find a copy of it. But Gary Eckelbarger's Blackjack, is probably the best book I've ever read about Logan.
Yeah, that is a good one. That is the best one. Yeah.
All right, I'll have to look. I'll post a link to that in the show notes so people can at least see the name of the book and then look it up.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the museum itself again. So when are you open? You're in Murphysboro. Is there an admission fee? Tell us just a little of the nuts and bolts about visiting.
We're open Tuesday through Saturday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. We accept donations.
Yes.
So if you come to visit us, there's not a specific charge, but we very much welcome any donation you'd like to give us.
Mm-hmm. And are you open the Tuesday through Saturday?
Saturday. Mm-hmm.
Year round, or do you close in the winter?
Round.
Mm-hmm.
Year round.
And this year we were open on Memorial Day, had a lot of people, because normally, poor Laura, you know, she got to have a day, you know, we needed to give Laura a day off. We thought, you know, well, let's open up. We're a Civil War museum. We need to be open on Memorial Day since the guy who founded it. And sure enough, we had a ton of people come through. So we're going to continue to do that. And we have activities coming up. We have, we're having a very interesting event on August 17th. We're having a brunch with Mary, and we're going to make this an annual event, and where we celebrate Mary Logan's birthday. Hers is the 15th of August, 17th is a Saturday. And we're going to have different themes, and this year's theme is women in politics. And we're having Senator Terry Bryant and our former Lieutenant Governor Sheila Simon speak about politics. We have a Republican and a Democrat, and it's not to be about policy, but about what it's like to be female in politics. And it should be really enlightening. And it's a brunch. Tickets for $20. And
right.
Yeah,
So
reasonable.
will that be at the museum or someplace else? At the museum?
On the museum grounds.
On the grounds. Yes,
Yeah.
right. Good weather. We'll have tents and what have you. But we have a beautiful shady area that makes it much, much cooler, and sitting down and enjoying the atmosphere, because we have such a lovely, it's a different feel when you're here with the brick streets and the old buildings. It really kind of transported back in time.
Absolutely. You almost have to have an ice cream social with something like that, right?
Yeah. I think we're gonna do that next Memorial Day. We're gonna, follow through with that.
And they can, people can find out how to get tickets for that through your website then, or calling the museum, or just showing up, or
Call the museum.
We're working on the website. The website's in the process of being updated. I should be getting something back from them next week.
Or you can text me at 618-967-0443 if you want tickets.
Right.
We will have to limit it, obviously. We're thinking about 60 people would be the most we could possibly handle. And we're really looking forward to having Senator Bryant and Sheila Simon with us.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It is really should be a tremendous event. And then we're having a fundraising event September 28th. We're having a Buffalo Tro here on the grounds as well. And then we're having a trivia night, which is basically history. We're really obviously big on history here. So, and we're doing that in November 8th at the Elks Club here in Murphysboro.
All right. A lot going on.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
So you mentioned the website. So just give us quickly some ways that folks can find out what's going on with the museum. Like you mentioned your website, and then if you have a presence on social media, where they can find you there.
Facebook page.
Yep.
And what's the website address?
It's loganmuseum.org. Yeah.
Yeah. Not great. We don't usually go on and looking at our website, but there you go. But it is Logan Museum, loganmuseum.org. That's for sure. That's what it is.
All right. I will post a link to that in the show notes as well, so people can get to that, and then a link to your Facebook page.
Yeah, that's where we get the more up to date until we get this website.
Yeah.
Right. Out. Probably that's more of the events and things, more current things are posted.
Yeah, what's happening right away.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Anything else you want folks to know about John Logan or the museum?
Well, we're more than just a building. We have a native wildflower prairie. We have the Dalton House, which is the original building from about 1880, in the 1880s. We have a labyrinth, which is a memorial to the soldiers who died in the SS Lion when it sunk in April of
1865.
Yeah,
End of March, 1865.
Yeah.
And we have an archaeological site where the foundation of Dr. Logan's home has been unearthed, and it's covered because the building that stands there now actually sits on the corner of that foundation. And so that was uncovered. An addition was built onto this house with large plexi windows so you can see down into the dig site. We have it marked off where the foundation was, so you can get a good idea of where Dr. Logan's home stood, where John Logan was born.
Right.
Fantastic. Well, Betsy and Laura, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate taking time out of your busy day to chat with me about the museum and this fascinating character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for helping
Thank
get the
you.
word out.
Yes, appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to the series on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss out on future episodes. I offer the podcast for free, but when you support the show with a few bucks through Patreon, you help keep the program going. Just go to patreon.com/Dean Klinkenberg. If you want to know more about the Mississippi River, check out my books. I write the Mississippi Valley Traveler guidebooks for people who want to get to know the Mississippi better. I also write the Frank Dodge Mystery Series that's set in places along the river. Find them wherever books are sold. The Mississippi Valley Traveler podcast is written and produced by me, Dean Klinkenberg. Original music by No Offense. See you next time.